John Dickerson joins me now from Washington. John, how does Britain's vote to leave the EU translate to the presidential election here?
I think there are two elements to it. One is, how did each of the presidential candidates act in the moment? Voters look at these kinds of big news events and they look for some kind of a read from a candidate about how they would act as commander-in-chief, because that's what we do, for good or ill. When there's a crisis, we turn to our presidents for answers. So there's the kind of theatrical piece of it. But then there's the much more important piece, which is which of the two candidates are speaking both to the political need in the United States, which mirrors in a lot of ways the economic anxiety and frustration in the UK, but then at a policy level, which of the two of them, beyond just how they speak politically about these issues, which of their policies would make the most sense and help fix some of the problems that are at the core of this. And that really is the big economic conversation the country should have been having, hasn't been having for really the last 20 years.
Donald Trump, he received a lot of criticism for his trip to Scotland this week. And then in recent polling, it's not helping. The latest Washington Post ABC News poll, in fact, has him trailing Hillary Clinton by 12 points. So how much damage has Trump done to his campaign?
Well, I think that Post poll was probably in the field before he was in Scotland, or even the Brexit vote. I think that he has had a number of challenges over the last few weeks, which have come at a time that was already going to be challenging for him. The big question facing the Trump campaign after the primary was how much the skills and talents he showed to do something extraordinary in the Republican race were going to be able to translate to a general electorate, which is different. And also, how much would Republicans, some of whom were very much against Donald Trump, going to rally around him and rally behind him? We have seen the polling is a little bit all over the place. In some state polling, including our Battleground Tracker results, we've seen a rallying by Republicans to Donald Trump in those competitive battleground states that we hear about every 4 years. In the national polling, though, you've seen Republicans flee from Donald Trump, although at first they were unified behind him. So we'll have to see how voters take in his response to the economic events that have happened as a result of the UK leaving the EU. And you'll see whether Hillary Clinton's argument, which is essentially in times of chaos, we don't need a president who is more chaotic, whether that works, or whether Donald Trump, who says what they did in the UK is a version of what I'm going to help us do in America, whether there's any appetite for that kind of argument.
All right, John Dickerson in Washington for us. Thank you, John.
Sure thing.
It started as Brexit, a cheeky name to label the UK's referendum vote that happened on Thursday. And as we have been discussing, when given the choice to remain or leave the European Union, 52% of voters in Britain chose to leave, giving birth to a new nickname now, Regrets It. Joining me now from London to talk about these ramifications of the vote is Tom McTague, chief financial correspondent for Politico, covering Europe for us. Tom, thanks for joining us. Is this a case of regrets it? It seems like people in England are a bit fatigued by this vote.
Well, I mean, I think some people may be regretting it, but these are probably the same people that voted to remain. So you've got to take it with a pinch of salt. 17 million people voted for Brexit, and there's an online petition where 3 million people have signed it to say that we should have a second referendum. But I don't think you can read too much into that.
Earlier on Face the Nation, David Ignatius of the Washington Post said that we've run up against a wall and that we can't reverse the way the world trades. I want you to take a listen to what he said.
Again and again, year after year, European leaders said ever wider, ever deeper. But when this was put to votes in countries, even like France, which we think of as the center of the European Union, France turned down the EU constitution when it was put to French voters some years ago. So I think the public has always been more uneasy about this union than the elites who had a vision of it and certainly profited from it. And we've run up against a wall. I just would note that economic globalization is here to stay. Economic nationalism is not a viable idea. Political nationalism clearly is strong. It's powerful in Britain, it's powerful in Russia, it's powerful everywhere. But you're not going to reverse the way in which the world's trade flows are now bound together. And I think that's the problem that the British people have to think about.
What do you think? Do you agree?
It's an obvious point. I think one thing that gets missed in this, that a lot of the supporters of Brexit come from the conservative right of the party. They are free marketeers. They are, sort of uber Thatcherite, Reaganite supporters. They look at the global economy and they want to see fewer barriers, trade barriers. They want an open British economy to the US, to Canada, to Australia, to China and to India. And they see the European Union as holding Britain back from that sort of free market dream. So it goes both ways. I'm not sure the supporters of Brexit, the working class supporters in poorer towns around the country, necessarily agree with that prescription. But it's not as simple as a rejection of globalization. This was about control, political control, immigration and other things like that. But it was also about, can we take the destiny of our own economy into our own hands, or do we have to be tied to this bloc?
We know that there has been a petition being sent around calling for another vote. They want a redo, in other words. So what are the chances that Britain actually does stay in the European Union?
I think it's very slim. I mean, it wasn't like there was 100 votes in this, or 1,000 or 100,000. It was over 1 million votes in between the two camps. 52% to 48%. That's a clear victory. The people who are asking for a new referendum are, on the whole, the people who lost it. You have to question, would they be asking for a second referendum if the result was reversed? I don't think they would. But it exposes a sort of generational divide in the UK between the younger voters who feel that their future has been taken away from them by the older generation who voted en masse to leave. But then at the same time, 35% of younger voters didn't bother voting, and older voters voted in their droves. So there is contradictions all over the place in this referendum. But it's being done. It's not going anywhere. Britain's leaving. It depends how we leave now.
Tom McTague, Chief Financial Correspondent for Politico. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.